Greetings from Columbia Business School Executive Education. My name is Scott Gardner, and I'm here today with Professor Michel Pham for today's webinar, Strategic Customer Insight, 5 Key Questions You Need to Answer. Before I introduce Michel, I'd like to just go over a few quick logistics. As you'll see on your screen right now, a recording of this webinar will be sent to you. If you'd like to tweet about the webinar, please do so at #CBSExecEd. And finally, please submit those questions to the Q&A box. Professor and I will get to as many of those as possible in the last 10 minutes. It's my pleasure to introduce Professor Michel Pham. He is the Kravis Professor of Business in Marketing at Columbia Business School, where he has been teaching and doing research for more than 25 years. He's the author of more than 50 scientific articles in consumer behavior, marketing, and decision-making, and a leading expert in consumer psychology, marketing strategy, and branding. He is a fellow and past president of the Society for Consumer Psychology. He teaches in the MBA, EMBA, PhD, and executive education programs, and is the research director of the Center on Global Brand Leadership and co-faculty director of the Executive Education Brand Leadership Program. This fall, Professor Pham has a brand new executive education program, Strategic Customer Insight, Understanding Your Customer for Better Value Creation. Professor, it's great to be with you today. I will rejoin you in the last 10 minutes for the Q&A.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction, Scott. And thank you for all of you who joined us today virtually here at Columbia Business School. This is a very exciting topic, one that I've been very passionate about, which is strategic consumer insights, and we'll be talking about 5 key questions that you need to answer. So let's first define what we mean by customer insight, and we all understand it to be the process of developing a deep understanding of customers for different types of purposes. It could be for guiding innovation, product development, business strategy, marketing, or policy. And as you do that, it is very important that you be clear about the process through which you're going to be doing this insight generation. And as someone who has studied this issue for the past 25 years or so, and done that with across a variety of venues with many companies, with many executives all over the world, it occurred to me that it all boils down to being able to provide answers to 5 sets of questions that collectively will be getting you at what customer insight is or should be about. And these sets of questions, as I've investigated them over the years, end up being the same, whether you are dealing with B2B or B2C customers. You always have to answer these 5 sets of questions. And you may be spending maybe 2 days on this. If you are a small organization just getting started, you may be spending a whole year on this if you really have large initiatives within your organizations. But the questions always remain the same. And so let's try to answer and examine what are those 5 sets of questions. The first question is a question that we always ask ourselves, and that should be relatively easy in that it's deceptively easy, is who is the customer that we're dealing with, right? And if I go to a company and ask them this question, they might tell me in a B2C setting, such as, my customers are male retirees, 65 plus. Or my customers are female professionals, 25 to 49, something like that in a B2C settings. In a B2B settings, they might tell us something a bit different. They will tell us usually a company. This is a small company that does sports-related activities programming, or it could be mid-sized companies within the transportation sector, right? So that is the way people naturally think about who is a customer. But this is really not a good way of getting started for understanding customer insights. And instead of asking yourself, who is your customer, you should be asking and answering the following question. Who are the key decision makers with respect to what you are selling and marketing? Who are the key decision makers? And when you ask this question this way, then you start realizing that you have a much bigger sets of constituents that you possibly might need to understand better. So for example, if you think about this very simple product category, like a game console, and ask yourself, instead of asking yourself, who is your customer, but ask yourself, who are the key decision makers with respect to these game consoles, then you may realize that there may be more than one individual. There'll be definitely the child, usually male, 5 to 17 or so, but and they are the customers, and they are part of the decision-making process because they are typically the users, the primary users of these products. But then you would probably realize that there'll be other decision makers involved, most likely the parents, and they would be involved because they are the buyers or they are the payers for this type of products. And you can possibly envision there may be other parties involved, possibly the grandparents who may have something to say about whether this is a good idea or not a good idea to buy a game console for the child. So what you're dealing with is not a single individual, but in practice, a collection of individuals that we call the decision-making unit. And you may have a user, you may have some buyers, payers, maybe some influencers. And so rather than thinking about who is the customers, the first question for generating good customer insight is to try to identify the entire decision-making unit that you are dealing with. And the way you think about this, you should be thinking about this, about is asking the questions, who are the main decision makers that I am facing with, and what is their relative influence on the entire decision-making process? Once you have this understanding of who are the key decision makers, then you can ask the remaining questions of customer insight. And the next question that you should be asking yourself is, what are the needs of the customers that I just identified in the preceding stage of these primary decision makers I just identified? And this is a very fundamental question that we all understand we should be asking ourselves whenever we're doing business and for innovations, for marketing, for strategy, etc. And that question often involves simply going to the customers and asking them some questions, what are that are meant to probe their needs. And those questions can be asked in the form of a focus group or an interview or a survey, whatever the format that you have for interacting with your customers. And when you ask this question this way, you're going to be only getting at just part of the picture of the needs of the customers. And their answers you're going to get from these questions asked of the customers is what I call the expressed needs. Right? The needs that the customers is able or is willing to express to you. Right? Now, if you spend some time interacting with customers, you will quickly realize that the customers does not always verbalize all the needs that they have. There'll be certain needs that they may not be able to tell you about. What drove the success of Starbucks as a brand over the years was not the fact that their coffee was necessarily better. What drove Starbucks over the years was the fact that there was a latent need among many North American consumers for a space that was between their homes and their offices, where it was socially appropriate to spend about an hour of their time in consuming some warm beverage while you're killing your time. That need was never really explicitly expressed, but existed there. So you need to realize that there will be real needs that the customers will not be able to express. Now, as you can sort of see on my chart here, not all needs that the customers express are necessarily real. So you have to make a distinction on and ask yourself, is this need that I'm studying and then hypothesizing about, is it a real need or is it a fictitious need? And the simple answer for sorting out those two is to ask yourself, would the customers be willing to pay more if that need were to be addressed? If they're not willing to pay more, then this is by definition not a real need. The last set of questions you need to ask yourself here in this analysis is this need currently already being addressed properly by us or by the rest of the industry? And if it is addressed, that's great. If it is not addressed, that is an opportunity for you to think about some needs that may not have been addressed by the industries, whether they've been expressed or not expressed. So now, if you think about what I've just done, is that there are three fundamental distinctions. First of all, is this need expressed or not expressed? Is the need being is it real or fictitious, or is this need being addressed or not addressed yet? And once you combine those three distinctions, then you realize that one of the challenges and opportunities for you when you do customer need analysis is to be able to sort out all the potential areas of needs that may exist in the market into 8 different buckets. And each of these buckets really have different implications. For example, if you go at the center of this chart here in area number 1, these are the needs that the customers have expressed that are already addressed by the industry and that are real. This is an area that I call the game entry needs. These are needs that you absolutely need to provide and to be able to fulfill properly within as an organization in order to be able to even play the game, right? This is very different from what happens in the area number 2 here, which I call immediate opportunities. These are the low-hanging fruits. This is an area of real needs of the customers that they are expressing to you as an industry, but that the industry somehow is not currently addressing. So this is clearly the area of immediate opportunities. And there are other areas that present themselves, including areas that fall on the fictitious needs side of this chart. For example, area number 5 is what I call misguided efforts. This is an area where customers or a set of customers have expressed a need that are not real, there are fictitious needs, but the industry decided to listen to them and fulfill those needs. And a good example of that is when Coca-Cola was doing research in the 1980s, and then some of the research that was conducted suggested that consumers like the taste of the soda, of the cola, to be slightly sweeter, a bit more like Pepsi. They decided to launch a product called New Coke, which was a total failure. And it's just because there wasn't, even though consumers thought or somehow revealed that they wanted something sweeter, it turns out this is not really what they really wanted and needed. Okay? So very important that you spend time on understanding the needs of the customers, and using this tool here called the need landscape analysis is a good way to go about that. Once you understand the needs of the customers, the next step for you is to try to get a good sense of the valuation process that the customer is going to go through. So at some point, the customers will have a set of options, and the options that will give them the greatest amount of value, relatively speaking, is the most likely, the option that they're most likely to choose. So it's very important that you understand the valuation process. And so how do customers evaluate different options that they have in front of them? And how much value do they see in what I have to offer relative to what others are offering to them? And this is a question that we all understand is very critical in marketing and business, is that the business is a value generation game and a value creation game. So as you try to understand the valuation process, the main approach you should be using here is to try to think about and come up with a good formal model of this valuation process. And there are different approaches you can use for getting this formal model. All the models that exist are models of relative value. So you have to understand that value is always relative to the other options that the customers have. And so one type of model that is sometimes used in B2B settings, especially in the commodity business, is what we call the economic value added to the customer model, which is an estimate of the dollar value that the customer is saving by choosing your option as opposed to selecting another option. There's another model that I use a lot in my work, which is called the multi-attribute model, which is a model not of objective value, but a model of subjective value. And the way it goes is trying to understand what are the decision drivers for the customers in your categories, how much weight do they attach to these various decision drivers, and then how much do they like the different options on each of these decision drivers, right? If you get all that information, you can aggregate that and combine that into an overall model we call the multi-attribute model that is very insightful once you have that essentially map of the valuation process. There's another tool that exists as well that is known as conjoint analysis, which is a model that does essentially the flip side of the multi-attribute model. Instead of trying to come up the valuation of the different elements of the valuation that the customers might have, I'm going to ask the customers an overall evaluation judgment of many, many configurations of the products. For example, I'm going to ask them, oh, how much do you like this hotel room at the Marriott hotel compared to this hotel room at the Hyatt here. And then consumers might have, one of the room might have a larger bed, but a smaller bathroom. Another room might have a smaller bed, but a larger bathroom. So one room might have newspapers delivered. Another room might have a fridge and a safe in the room. If I give consumers a lot of these options and a lot of configurations and give them an overall evaluation measure, I can statistically try to decompose and analyze all they have given us as in terms of overall evaluations into a model of how much do they like each of the components of the overall evaluation. How much do they like a larger bed compared to a smaller bed? How much do they like a larger bathroom compared to a smaller bathroom, etc. So overall, very important that you need to have a formal model of the evaluation process, and which model you end up using depends on the industry where you operate. Now, once you have a sense of the evaluation process, a classic mistake that I see a lot of marketers do is that they think that they understand everything that they need to know about the overall buying process. Of course, I know that whichever ones the customers value more will be chosen, and then therefore I feel like I can stop here in terms of my understanding of the customers. And that's a mistake, because the valuation process is only part of a broader process of selecting an offer in a given product category. And therefore, the next level of insight is about answering the following question: what is the overall sequence of events that the customers go through in order to select a product in your category or a vendor in your category? And we call that buying process analysis. And you will see that there are a series of stages in your industries that they're going to go through. And in the B2C settings, for example, what you often find is that there is some event happening in the life of the customers that makes them recognize that they have a need for a given product in their category. And then they start searching for the option, searching for information. That search can be done, doing research online in the environment, talking to friends, etc., doing a little bit of scouting of different retailers, or it can be simply searched based on what they know from the marketplace, search in their own memory, and then they'll narrow down a set of options to a smaller set that we call the consideration set. And then there will be the formal evaluation, that is the things that we talked about in the preceding question, and make a choice. Now, the big thing to recognize is that by the time the customers makes their formal evaluation, a lot of implicit decision-making has taken place already. They have decided that they need a product in your category. They have decided on where to look for information. They decided already on how to narrow down a set of options. And there's a lot of insights that comes from understanding these earlier decisions that the customer has made. Last level of analysis that you need to reach for through customer insights, and then to broaden even further and ask yourself, what is the overall experience that the customers has in my category? And that experience, involves a lot of potential, elements, including the decision-making process, the buying process that we talked about, from need recognition, search, and so on and so forth, which is often described by some as what we call the customer decision journey. But the experience of the customer does not stop there. It's not because you have completed your decision-making journey and your buying journey that your life stops. There's a lot more to the customer experience that happens after that, including, your experience when the product gets delivered, when you have to pay, when you have to install it, when you have to store it, to transport it, when you have to repair, and so on and so forth. And the key thing to recognize is once you understand that there's a lot of different elements of the customer experience, there'll be at each of these stages several things that you can monitor. First of all, you need to monitor whether there's value being created at a given stage. For example, when Amazon gave you an opportunity to store the different places where you can ship, they have created value at the stage of ordering for you. Okay? When Amazon's give you a reminder that your package is about to be delivered, they have created value from the delivery stage of the entire experience, right? But not only you need to monitor whether value is created, you should also monitor and realize that sometimes the value is being destroyed at certain stages. So there's an airline that I fly regularly when I go to Asia, which is a good airline. They have nice planes, nice staff, comfortable, etc. But they have a horrible website, which means that every time I book a flight there, I have a 30 to 40% chance that my flight ordering session is going to somehow collapse on me and have a bug and require that I redo my ordering, my booking process. When something like that happens, you have to realize that value is being destroyed, right? So the airline that spends billions of dollars on its planes and on training its staff is somehow destroying value on something that is much cheaper, which is the functionality and the user experience on the website, on the e-commerce part of their website, right? So, so you have to think about value creation, value destruction, and then ask yourself, is there any evidence that there may be some unmet needs that is being revealed by any of the things that you observe at any of these stages? The last aspect of customer experience analysis is to recognize that each of these stages and whatever happens there is also shaping consumers' perceptions of your overall brand. So if you have a great hospitals, great doctors, and great service overall, but then you have a very nasty billing department employees calling on the customers and nagging them and insulting them to collect the bills, you are also shaping the overall perception of the brand. So in a nutshell, let me summarize what we have covered today. So if you want to have good customer insight, you need to be able to answer 5 sets of questions. The first question is, who are the key decision makers that you're dealing with, and how much influence do they have? That's what we call decision-making unit analysis. Second question is that for those key decision makers, what are the needs that these decision makers have? And one of the tools you can use in order to have a better understanding of this question is to do this need landscape analysis that sorts out the needs in terms of real versus not real, expressed, not expressed, addressed, not addressed. Then you need to have a good model of the overall valuation process that the customers go through here. And there are different types of models they could be using depending on the industry where you operate. Then further expand your picture and try to understand the entire buying process. What are the stages through which your customers has to go through in order to select a vendor in your category or select a product or a service in your category. And finally, the last set of questions has to do what are the components of the overall experience that the customers has within your category. And that includes experience elements that are part of the decision journey that companies often focus on, but also things that are outside of the decision journey after the decision journey has been completed, including like installations, configurations, disposal, storage, etc. Because at each of these stages, there'll be lots of information and lots of insights that will be further revealed. All right, that's what I wanted to share with you in these 20, 25 minutes or so. Now is maybe Scott, you can come back and sort of see if there are any questions that I could be answering for our audience.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor. A lot of good questions came in, so let's get started. You know, the first one that we noticed, I think it's a great kickoff question from Kathleen is, how does your advice differ in B2B versus B2C? I think it's a great kickoff question.
Yes, it's a great question. The advice is the same. This is quite surprising. A lot of people think that customer insight is different, very different for B2B and B2C. In my experience and the way I have done it is essentially the same 5 sets of questions. You know, it still revolves around the decision-making unit that you need to identify. It might be more complex for B2B than B2C, but even in B2C, it's important to think of a decision-making unit. Customer need analysis is going to be the same process. You should be using the same set of tools for B2B and B2C. Same thing for customer value analysis. There might be slightly different models you use for that, but still the same sets of questions. Same thing for buying process analysis. Same thing for customer experience analysis.
Great, thank you. All right, next up from Uday, he asks, what blocks companies from getting true customer and consumer insights?
That's a great question as well. In my experience, I have found there are two major blocks. One of the blocks that you have around there is mostly coming from senior executives that feel like they know more about their customers than they actually do. And somehow, because of their knowledge, somehow that they impose on the rest of the organizations, there's a lot of blockage, and that prevents them from gathering true customer insights. Right? That's the first problem. The second problem is that there's often a confusion between data and that companies collect about their customers and insights. And a lot of organizations spend tons of resources, gathering data there, and then there's this pile of data, and they don't know what to do with it, right? And the reason that they don't know what to do with it is, first of all, they gather the wrong data, and they don't have a proper framework for analyzing the data they have gathered. And that's for a reason why having these 5 sets of questions, the way I've articulated today, is a good way to sort of prevent that from happening.
Would you would you say that they, to kind of, I think it aligns them at giving them different buckets to work from. They work in that order, or is there a specific order they should go in, or can they?
Okay, I think that in that 5 sets of questions that I suggest, the first 2 should always be answered in that fixed order. Identify the key decision makers, that's the number 1. Identify the need of those key decision makers, that would be number 2. The remaining stages, the value analysis, buying process analysis, experience analysis, can be analyzed in a slightly different sequence if you want to, depending on what happens in your organizations. But the first 2 needs to be answered first.
Go in there. And then, it's interesting what you said about the decision makers. You sort of touched upon it a little bit in the first question, but the idea that the decision makers, sort of an example of the parents, with the child, or say like senior executives, may not be using the product and may not really have the valuable insight. So you really have to kind of understand whether or not this is the person that uses it, not just decides on it, right?
And sometimes the key decision makers happen to be people that are not really obvious. I was dealing with a company in China at some point that makes electronics, and one of the products that they sell are smart watches. And the key markets that we're looking at were children, and they were trying to sell more smart watches for children. And we did this analysis together, and we realized that one of the key decision makers that they had to deal with is the teachers of those children, because the teachers did not want the children to be distracted by smart watches when they are in class. And they were a major blockage for the adoption of smart watches. And then we discussed with the companies, how do you modify the teachers, and how do you innovate so that the teachers are less reluctant from allowing the smartwatches to be adopted in the classroom, such as, for example, including some functionality that kills off access to the internet once the class is in session. That's the kind of things that you can uncover if you have a formal process for identifying the decision-making unit.
Right. And I think, I'm just coming to really realize that first bucket, or that first step, identifying the key decision makers, is not only just identifying them correctly, but identifying the kind of questions you need to ask them depending on who they are. It's very important. All right.
Thank you.
Question came in from Balarabe. He says, have you found any correlation between customer satisfaction and customer needs in your research?
Well, the correlation would be as follows, right? So if you are able as an organization to better satisfy the needs, the real needs of the customers, then you're going to have, a higher satisfaction being provided to as an organization. But as you try to do this, it's very important that you really diagnose the true needs of the customers. And sometimes some of the needs that the customers really care about are not necessarily needs that they are willing to verbalize to you. And that's why going beyond the expressed needs and identifying the latent needs, even things that they may not necessarily realize themselves, is very critical in these overall sets of processes.
Right. And then to see that if another company suddenly provides a need they didn't even know they needed, then you're in dangerous territory there if you're not thinking about it, right?
Exactly. That's also an important. Oh, go ahead, continue.
I was going to say we're at 12 o'clock, but can I ask for a few more minutes of your time because we've got some really good questions.
Of course, of course.
Great. Okay, the next question came in from Felix, and this was very specific to your value analysis. When it comes to value analysis, is there a model that works better for the B2B approach?
Yeah, there are two models, but the main model that I think works the best would be what I call the multi-attribute model. This is the model that is the most flexible. It's that applies across most industries. That would be, I would say, 80% of the B2B industries that I've examined would be well served by a multi-attribute model. The remaining 20% would be my use of the economic value added to the customer EVC model. But the multi-attribute model is a very powerful model. It's not perfect, but it's a very good model to work with.
So follow up with that, Charland asked, so the valuation models, it seems to be of great interest to everybody who's watching. Are there specific models that work better for different industries and sectors, or is it not that you just have to evaluate it on your own?
As I said, the multi-attribute model will work well across most industries. One of the areas where the models do not work so well, the multi-attribute model, is the areas that of luxury, right? Luxury, very hedonic products in the consumer markets. These are areas in which the main models have struggled with, and then you have to somehow come up with slightly different models for doing that.
You know, it's interesting. A question just came in that I sort of was thinking of too. Can you give a few examples of these fictitious needs that and some tips for recognizing them when you're evaluating?
Okay, so an example of a fictitious, I'll give you one here. If you talk to consumers in the vacuum markets, you go and interview consumers. You say, all right, we want to build the next generation of vacuum cleaners. What would you like? What are your needs? A lot of consumers are going to tell you, I want the vacuum cleaner to be more silent, to make less noise, just too loud. And that is a classic fictitious need, because here's what's going to happen. If you make a silent vacuum cleaner, they're not going to like it. They're not going to like it because one of the major ways in which consumers assess whether it works or not is based on how loud it is. And if it is not loud, they feel like that doesn't suck anything. That doesn't suck anything. And so that's a classic fictitious need there. In a B2B setting, one of the things that happened, I observed that I was talking to people at Boeing many years ago, and there were some airlines, a number of airlines that says, what we want is what we need are those massive planes that allows us to transport 500-600 passengers from across different hubs, right? And this is something that they were telling to Airbus as well as to Boeing. And Boeing says, you know what? I don't think this is what you need. Remember, an aircraft manufacturing and planning process, we're talking about something that can take 15 years or so. So you need to foresee the demand and the customer needs 15 years from now. And the folks at Boeing says, no, I don't think this is where the market is going. I don't think this is what they need. And the Airbus took the bait. They made that massive Airbus A380, and the product mostly failed. Now they just decided to discontinue it. They sold relatively few, to one airline in particular, and that's another example of a fictitious need, even though the customers might express it.
Great. Well, this has been so interesting, and I'm so excited about your upcoming program in the fall. That again, it's the Strategic Customer Insight, Understanding Your Customers for Better Value Creation, coming up this fall. I love this roadmap. Before we go, one of the questions I always like to end the webinars with is, to keep this momentum going, to keep the momentum of these 5 steps, what would you just say is the first thing someone can do today, tomorrow, or in the next few days with their team, in their industry themselves? I know it's that first tier, but like, what is just something that they can do to keep this momentum going?
I mean, the first thing that you need to do is to write down the 5 sets of questions and then go around their team and say, of these 5 sets of questions that we just heard about, which are the ones that we know the answer for sure now, and which are the ones we don't know for sure? And one of the ways you can tell whether you know the answer for sure or not is to have everyone on the team answer the questions separately, and then come back together and see if whether you provided the same answer. Because if you're not providing the same answer, this is already a sign that you really don't know the answer.
Oh, that's a great tip. Thank you. That's a great ending. Thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today. On behalf of Professor Michel Pham, myself, and Columbia Executive Education, we thank you for joining us. Hope to see you at future webinars and Professor's program in the autumn. And we thank you for joining us at the very center of business.
Thank you very much.